Get out.
Good morning. Welcome in. Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN, brought to you by RPT and Rick's Pro Truck. Spray and bed liners, lift kits, wheels, and tires. 3 locations. RPT, ricksprotruck.com. We welcome in our friend Tom Luginbill on 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. He joins us on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. And we're going to start with Ole Miss, 6-1, ranked in the top 10 for the first time since 2015. They beat LSU. Now they travel down to Auburn on the Plains, in which should be a crazy game this Saturday night. Tom, Ole Miss started slow but took care of business. They're 6-1. What'd you see as they ended up rolling through LSU eventually?
Well, I'll tell you what I'd love to see is what would Ole Miss look like if they were 100% healthy across the board. I mean, this team's got a lot of resiliency, a lot of grit. Defensively, they seem to be coming along. I mean, it forced 3 turnovers, 5 sacks, I think 7 tackles for loss. I mean, it was just a really good day for them. And, it didn't start the way they wanted it, but 31 unanswered points over the course of the game, I just kind of felt like it showed what they're made of. And now you've got to go on the road and you got to take on what's going to be a probably pretty healthy team at the midway point for Auburn, who's coming off of a bye, and you got to play at night at Jordan-Hare, which is obviously always a challenge. But I just continue to be impressed with Matt Corral. And I know that you and I have talked about him ad nauseum going back to, February, March, whatever, leading into spring football. But that guy's not 100% healthy, and he just keeps battling and making plays. So very, very impressed with the performance of that football team.
And you still feel like he's better than Spencer Rattler?
Just a tad bit. Just a tad bit. God, you know what? It's funny you bring that up because I had forgot. Somebody reminded me the other day when I had said on your show that I didn't think Spencer Rattler was in Matt Corral's league. And I remember when that got posted on the internet and just the vitriol that I received from Oklahoma fans.
Man.
But I'll tell you this, and I have Oklahoma this week, but that Caleb Williams kid, he might be the next Matt Corral.
Are you going to wear a T-shirt that says "Told you so" this week?
Nope. I don't do it.
Okay.
Because the moment you start to do that, it backfires on you. No.
Okay.
The internet is a dark, dark, evil place. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Yeah, and Twitter's even worse.
Twitter's the worst place because it's given license to people to say whatever they want under the veil of anonymity and never have to be accountable for it.
Right. All right, Ole Miss and Auburn. Ole Miss is 6-1. Like you said, they're doing everything they need to do. They're fine. It's all about finding ways to win, and they've done that against Arkansas, Tennessee, and LSU. So with Auburn, they're coming off a really good win in Fayetteville and a week off. So as you look at this match, how about this? Where do you start as you look at this matchup Saturday night on the Plains?
Well, I think it starts with, can Ole Miss affect Bo Nix? There's always been 2 versions of Bo Nix, right? There's very little in between. He's either careless and up and down as a quarterback and risky with the football and flushing from the pocket too early, or he's been very, very efficient and delivered the ball on time, played within himself and within the offense, and he's been effective. But he hasn't really been in between. They need to force the first version of Bo Nix, and they need to get him to give them the football. And, I mentioned some of the pressures, some of the defensive numbers from last week. Ole Miss needs to have another one of those type of performances so that you either create negative plays or you create plays that turn into turnovers and get that Ole Miss offense on the field. I think that if you're Auburn right now and you're Derek Mason, you're trying to do everything you can All right, number one, to keep that offense on the sideline. But I think the onus is on Auburn to sustain it offensively. And if Ole Miss can force some 3-and-outs, force some negative play, force some turnovers, now all of a sudden I think you have a huge advantage, because Ole Miss, to me, is just a much better, more dangerous football team offensively than, at least this year and first year for Brian Harsin, more so than Auburn ever dreamed of being.
Yeah. Tom Luginbill, national college football analyst with ESPN. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show. Well, all right, we'll talk about Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter. Hunter's from, I don't know, 70 miles up the road from here. I mean, they've kind of got a 1-2 punch running the football, Tom, and then when Nix is playing well, his mobility really can stretch defenses on games where he's playing well.
Yeah, there's no question about it, but they haven't run the football as effectively as I think people thought they would. I think coming into the year, it kind of felt like, wow, this could, if things go well, Tank Bigsby could have a Heisman caliber type year. I mean, he's that talented of a back. And then you've got Hunter coming in as a freshman. You mentioned the 1-2 punch. If they get that going, now all of a sudden Bo Nix can become an entirely different player, because you won't be behind the chains on second and third down. Your playbook will be open to you because you'll be manageable in third and less than 3 if you're running the football effectively. So all of that has an impact on Bo Nix. And listen, Bo Nix is a really, really good athlete. Bo Nix can do some things when the play breaks down. The problem is he'll do some of that stuff when it's not necessary. He'll flush the pocket when it's not necessary. He'll vacate the progression and get himself out on the perimeter and kind of screw up the structure of the play. And he's done that through his entire career. I think it's been better this year, and I think their scheme has helped that because they've forced him to play under center some more. They've been more of a pocket heavy instead of an east-west lateral play action team like they were under Gus Malzahn. But I do believe that if they don't run the football effectively on early downs, that's going to put a lot of pressure on Bo Nix.
Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds show. Let's flip over. Derek Mason's numbers as a defensive coordinator are really good. Not as a head coach, but as a DC. Boy, there's a lot of pressure on him this weekend because Ole Miss can beat you through the air, and then they just had an unbelievable weekend on the ground with Snoop Connor and Jerrion Ealy. So what do you see with Mason going against Kiffin, Lebby, and Corral?
I see a defense that better get lined up. I think that's the biggest thing. You know, everybody talks about pace of play and tempo and, you know, how do you get teams off schedule? We've talked about this before. Tempo is all based on getting first downs. If you get first downs, you can go 100 miles an hour. And so for me, if that tempo starts ramping up, Auburn can't get cute. They can't try and disguise. They can't try and, you know, create confusion for Matt Corral. They have to line up, get their cleats in the ground, and play defense. Because where you see people get in trouble against tempo offenses that are rolling is they're always trying, I don't want to say they're trying to get cute, but they're trying to do something that, you know, maybe creates a little confusion for the quarterback or gives them a different look pre-snap than you're going to get post-snap. And then all of a sudden the ball's being snapped and nobody's lined up. And that's the biggest concern. That happened actually in my game on Saturday night with Indiana. And Indiana's defensive coordinator had talked about what they wanted to try and do pre-snap versus post-snap and rotating coverage and giving, you know, C.J. Stroud different looks and all that. That was all well and good. And for the first 2 series of the game, about half the snaps that Ohio State had on offense, Indiana wasn't even lined up. So if you can't line up, you can't play. And I think if the tempo is a problem, you're going to have to play base defense to get lined up. Now, again, if for some reason on some of those early downs, they get Ole Miss off schedule and now the tempo slows down, now you can start integrating some of that stuff where you're trying to create maybe a different look pre-snap versus post-snap and you know, maybe get a little more diverse in your game plan. But I think it's all about handling the tempo if you're Derek Mason on defense.
So Vegas has it basically as a pick 'em, Tom. You mentioned there'll be all that. Auburn's excited again for the first time in a while. Do you expect a close game or no?
Yes, I do expect a close game. I think this game for Ole Miss is as much about handling the environment as it is about handling Auburn. Because at night, that is a difficult place to play. When that place gets rocking, and their student section in that one southern end zone is really, really difficult to handle. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all if this thing goes into the third quarter, potentially with a one-possession game. But I do think Ole Miss is the better team top to bottom with the better quarterback, which gives you an advantage going into the game.
Okay. All right, let's move to Kentucky at Mississippi State. Kentucky's kind of built like a Jackie Sherrill team in the 90s. Physical, run the football, milk the clock. Yeah, they're not worried about style points, but they'll beat up on you. Now, we were looking through this morning, and I know you already know these numbers, but Kentucky really hasn't played anybody that's going to chunk it 50 times. I mean, they haven't played anybody where their secondary was really stressed. Georgia threw the ball a whopping 11 times. Florida couldn't throw the ball, Luke. So, I don't – and Mississippi State leads the league in time of possession. I mean, they throw these 5 to 8 yard, throw it around. They want people to run around and get tired. So when you look at what Stoops brings to the table and what Mississippi State wants to do, what do you see in this one?
Rush 3, drop 8. Because I remember, I think it was, I don't know if it was last year. It might have been pre-pandemic. It might have been fall of 2019, which would have been Mike Leach's first year, correct?
Yeah. No, last year was his first.
Okay, so then it was last year. They went to Lexington, and I don't know if you remember this. They went to Lexington, and Mark Stoops, and I commend him on this. He literally said, "You know what? We're not gonna over complicate things here. If this Mississippi State team refuses to run the football, we are going to force them to run the football. Because how are you supposed to, if you're going to play man-to-man defense, all right, against Mississippi State, you're making a big mistake. That's where the air raid and that's where this passing game really, really flourishes. If you're not going to run the ball, I think we've established that with Mississippi State. Last year when Kentucky played them, their plan was unbelievable. They had 3-man rush. Sometimes they'd show a 4-man rush look, and then they'd drop one guy. All right, they'd bring zone pressure, but they were rarely in man-to-man coverage. So their eyes were always on the quarterback. Their eyes were always forward. And I think that Mark Stoops, as a defensive guy, is sitting there saying, we're good enough up front to be able to create some havoc with a 3- and 4-man rush, play zone behind it, and if they're not going to run the ball, it's awfully difficult to go the length of the field in the passing game without making a mistake. Really, really difficult. And I think that will be the plan. I think that will be the plan again. I really do.
All right, on the other side, Kentucky with 2 running backs, physical. Mississippi State with a solid defense. Are you expecting low scoring, Tom, in Starkville?
Yeah, I kind of am. I keep waiting, and it's not that he's been good enough, but like Will Levis has not been, a difference maker, if you will. He's been good enough, and I know he hasn't played a lot, so they're kind of still waiting for him to come into his own. But I think this is going to be a 3-pronged running attack. You mentioned the 2 backs. I think the quarterback is an integral part of the run game, and they'll come off of play action in the RPO game will be what they offset their run game with. And that's getting little chunk plays, whether it's the bubble screens, the slants, the hitches, off of the run action in the backfield. But there's no question the recipe, and you mentioned it. It's not complicated, all right? It's going to be based on line of scrimmage play. We're going to condense the game, shorten it up. We're going to play great defense, run the football. If we got to make a play here or there in the passing game to get us that big chunk split field position, Kentucky's shown that they can do that. But they've also shown that they don't have to be flashy to win football games. And I think that can't get glossed over.
Levis, the quarterback at Kentucky that you just referenced, he has 6 picks. Mississippi State has a couple of people in that secondary that are pretty opportunistic. They would love to get a turnover at some point Saturday night.
Yeah, and I think if it is a low-scoring game, if you can add a possession or 2 because of a turnover, that is a huge advantage, with whoever comes up with that number. And, if it's going to be a low-scoring game too, let's not forget that red zone efficiency will be extremely important. And if it's a low-scoring game, you have a chance to get down there, I think you got to be thinking 4-down territory because a touchdown's value in a low-scoring game is going to be magnified. So if you get, let's just say you get plus 37, you've got 3rd and 6. You're thinking we're 4 down territory. We've got 2 downs to get to 6. We're not going to kick a field goal because field goal probably is not going to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't be surprised if both football teams had that same offensive mindset.
Yeah, Mississippi State has struggled in the red zone. I don't know what Kentucky's numbers are, but MSU.
A lot of teams have. I will say this, Bo. There have been Purdue last week, okay, Indiana, or Purdue 2 weeks ago, and then they flipped the script on Iowa. Last week or Saturday, we had Indiana. They've been woefully ineffective in the red area. There's been a ton of teams, for whatever reason, in college football really struggling in the red area.
Tom Luginbill on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line. What was your takeaway on Illinois and Penn State? I usually don't watch that game. I was at the house this weekend. I mean, obviously, most of Big Ten football is kind of boring to me. I know you actually had the better team this weekend in Ohio State, and I want to get into that later as far as college football playoff. But my goodness, when you recruit at the level that Penn State does, and then you're playing a team that recruits at the level of Illinois, and you go through 9 overtimes and you can't do anything, what do I do with that, Tom?
Yeah, it's inexcusable, especially when you consider where the Illinois program is right now. I mean, their roster profile is not even in the same area code as Penn State. I think what was so staggering about that game is Penn State can't run the football and they can't stop the run. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I don't know, we all just for the first time really experienced the new overtime rule. And I, for one, I got to be honest with you, I was on the edge of my seat. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I think what's receiving the criticism more so than how the overtime system is devised is how poor the football was that got us to 9 overtimes.
Yeah.
I mean, the execution was so bad for both teams that should receive more criticism than the actual process. The process had, I think, everybody on pins and needles watching that thing.
No, I'm with you. And that's why I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there going, God, I'm watching this game. What am I doing? But
and you're loving it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting there going, what's happening with James Franklin? James Franklin has been a hot name for years. And I grew up here. I recognize what he did at Vanderbilt. It's absolutely remarkable what he accomplished. He goes to Penn State, and now they recruit gangbusters, as you know. And I know they've had one really good team and another good team, but they don't seem to be – why can't they get it together? He's an offensive guy. I thought they did some good things at Vandy, a team that hasn't believed in playing offense for the better part of 100 years. What in the world is going on in a much weaker league where they recruit better? What's happening there at Penn State, Tom?
It's not a weaker league in that division. I mean, that's the one thing. There's still Ohio State. We've seen Michigan improve. Michigan State, I can't even explain where they've come from. So in this particular year, division's really, really strong. I just think that as long as Ohio State is operating at the pace in which they are, is Penn State good enough to potentially beat them on any given Saturday? Yes. Are they just going to beat them man to man, even though Penn State is recruited well? I'm not convinced of that. And so I'm of the belief that, yes, the Penn State job's a good job. Yes, they've recruited well, but you've also got to understand, too, where they have to go to recruit and how hard it is to get kids to State College. It's not easy place to get in and out of, all right? You're going to have to cross over county and state lines to really recruit the caliber of player against your competitors that you're going to need to hopefully one day beat an Ohio State. I just think it's one of those jobs that it's the best job that you do. The best job that you do, if you happen to hit on a quarterback, which they did with Trace McSorley, all right? And if you looked, those were the best teams he's had, all right? They were a good football team. They had good players across the board, but Trace McSorley was really kind of the difference in that whole equation. But I think unless you hit on a guy like that, the rest of the roster is good enough to be in a 10, 11-win type program, which he's been, but I don't know if they're good enough. I look at Ohio State, and I think Ohio State with their personnel, which is superior. What I saw on Saturday night is so far superior to anybody else in the Big Ten. If they had average quarterback play, they could still be an 11-win team. I don't know if Penn State has the top-to-bottom profile to have average quarterback play and be an 11-win team.
Okay. Yeah, I know you've been there many a times. I've been there. It really is out in the middle of nowhere, and they do have to travel to get.
Man.
I think it's a
Yeah.
good program. It's not as good as we think because Joe Paul won for 40 years, and we still have that mindset. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, here's the other thing too that you got to remember is in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the early 90s. All right, that was a booming industry of blue collar. All right, you had the factories and the mills, and you had all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, that economical landscape shifted. All right, a lot of those places shut down, and where did families go? They moved south.
Yep.
They moved to better weather, lower cost of living, and so now Penn State, let's just say in 1982, could probably build a 25-man roster that could compete for a national championship in the state of Pennsylvania. You can't do that right now.
Right. Tom Luginbill on the Out of Bounds Show. All right, you mentioned Ohio State. So we got Georgia in the catbird seat, Ohio State in the catbird seat. Who else?
Oh, yeah. My top four right now would be Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Michigan.
Interesting.
I would not have Cincinnati or Oklahoma
in
the top four.
No, Cincinnati struggling against a 1-5 Navy team. That's who they are. And we've talked. We can't get too far into that. We've only got about a minute here. What about all right, Bama loses to Georgia in the SEC title game.
Mm-hmm.
Then what do you have?
Well, they're out. We're going to find out over here in the next 2 to 3 weeks how much the Big Ten cannibalizes itself. Because you have, Ohio State's schedule is going to really tell the tale. Michigan and Michigan State's schedule is really going to tell the tale. Penn State's now out of the mix with that second loss. So while I think if Alabama loses, they'd be out, I truly believe that. The real question is what happens if Oklahoma runs the table, if Oregon runs the table, all right, and the Big Ten finds itself in a position where, let's just say, Ohio State wins out, all right, is a one-loss team to Oregon, wins the Big Ten, but Michigan finishes 11-1 with the only loss being to Ohio State. Would you feel comfortable taking a Pac-12 champion Oregon with a loss, all right, or a Oklahoma, as you've seen them right now, as a Big 12 champion, over an undefeated Michigan with their only loss being to the number 1 or number 2 team in the country?
I'm out on Michigan. I'm leaning Oklahoma or Oregon.
All right. There you go.
Michigan.
That's going to make it so much fun. That's what's going to make it so much fun. For the first time in the college football playoff era, Bo, the college football playoff committee is actually going to have a difficult job.
Yes.
It's not like you can just say it's good. It's not going to be like it's been every year where you say, okay, it's these three, and we've got to find a fourth. That's not how it's going to be this year.
That's a good point. Hey, Boomer Sooner, have a good weekend, okay?
Thanks, buddy.
See you, bud. Tom Luginbill on the Bell's Two-Hearted Ale guest line, brought to you by Havana Smoke Shop. All your premium cigars, you can find it at the 2 locations, Havana Smoke Shop, I-55 North, and the Reservoir. The best selection of cigars in the state of Mississippi, Havana Smoke Shop. Show is also brought to you by Rick's Pro Truck. We'll be back in a second.